This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a non-profit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today? You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode number 22.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing Star Trek, the motion picture. And joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom?
And Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
So just so you know, a little programming note. In the middle of this podcast episode, we're going to take about 5 minutes where we're just going to stare at the screen and there'll be some music. So if you're okay.
Actually, I think we'll release the special edition of the podcast where that doesn't happen.
Oh, okay. All right.
We'll there we go.
I just thought we'd maybe get into this movie a little bit and let the listener experience some of that.
Well, at least the visuals in Star Trek: The Motion Picture were a lot more interesting than just us staring at each other over Skype for 5 minutes.
This is true.
Yeah.
So let's start off with a little bit about sort of how we got from the original series to this movie. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I want to talk about the movie itself too. But the movie came out in December 7th, 1979, a date that will live in infamy. And it was about over 10 years since the original series ended. Mm-hmm. And in that time period, a lot happened.
Yeah. Especially syndication. That
Yes.
was Star Trek went to new levels of success in the syndication market. There was sort of a revival with the animated series, but obviously that was not something that would ultimately satisfy the fans. They wanted to see the live action Star Trek back. And eventually they were able to get this movie thing going.
Right. And in between, there was an effort to have another Star Trek series, which is called Star Trek Phase 2.
Right.
Which got very close to actually producing a pilot.
Right. And they were going to launch it with a TV network, which then didn't end up happening at the time.
Right. And then, which is something that kind of happens later on with Voyager.
Right.
Interesting.
Also, we had the space shuttle being named Enterprise. That was a kind of demonstration of fan muscle.
Right. Exactly. Yes. That was where there was a space shuttle Enterprise that was a non-space going prototype.
It was like the trainer, the test platform, so that they could test a lot of things like the non-powered landing and things like that.
Right, exactly. And
but NASA had a competition, as I recall, that to name this first space shuttle, and the fan results was so overwhelming, that it would become the Enterprise.
Even though a lot of people at NASA didn't really like that.
Right. Well, it could have been worse. It could have been done in the age of the internet, and they would have named it Shuttle McShuttleface.
I was just going to mention. Bodie McBoatface. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
look up Bodie McBoatface on Google.
Yep.
You'll be entertained. Just think the people who it was a research vessel had a naming competition, and that's what the internet came up with, which I think is great.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they should have just gone with it, but they didn't. They gave it a more dignified name, but they did at least name like a probe that the research vessel has Bodie McBoat face.
Well, and, to be fair to NASA too, where they might not have liked it being named the Enterprise, but they did make a big deal out of it. I mean, there's footage you can go and watch today where, many of the cast of the original series were at the announcement and the unveiling of this new space shuttle.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I mean, they did make a big deal out of it, at least.
Yeah.
So,
then we got this movie.
Yes, and so now we have the movie, and we have
also we should mention influenced by Star Wars, because Star Wars had come out in 1977, and suddenly sci-fi was the thing, and everybody wanted to have their own blockbuster sci-fi movie, and hey, we've got this property laying around here, we at Paramount. Exactly. Why should we leave money on the table?
Let's blow it off, dust it off, and let's see what we can do with it.
Star Trek fans have Star Wars fans to thank. I mean, that frankly, and let's be honest, there's a lot of cross-pollination here. I mean, there are a lot of Star Trek fans who are Star Wars fans. I'm among them.
Absolutely, same here.
But, we have to thank Star Wars for making sci-fi respectable.
And now we've done that, and let's never speak of it again.
So first I want to talk about the music that we start with.
Yes.
The theme music that we get is not quite the TV show theme music, although
it will be.
Theme, right, the theme comes out a bit.
Yep.
But what we get is what turns out to be Star Trek music, essentially, is based on this theme that we get from this movie for until today, even, except for, let's not speak of the Enterprise theme anymore, but except for that.
Yeah, it's the famous trumpet one. It's not the woo from the original series. It's the trumpet fanfare from Next Generation.
And this is it's actually called Enterprise. You look at the soundtrack, it's actually called Enterprise.
And the reason they do that is because we first encounter it when we're getting a visual external tour of the Enterprise that goes on for at least 5 minutes, depending on which version you're watching.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Jerry Goldsmith is the
composer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Music guy was the word coming in my head.
And for those who might not remember this particular theme, this is the theme that was then used for Next Generation. That's what I think most people know it better as. Is Next Generation theme, not the motion picture theme.
Right. Although there are elements of the theme which Next Gen doesn't use, but stick with the Star Trek movies.
They didn't want 5 minutes opening credits in Next Gen.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I mean, but there are thematic elements that are uniquely the original series movies. Another bit of music, and this kind of leads into the next thing we'll talk about. But another bit of music is the Klingon theme, which is very clearly based on Gustav Holst's The Planets.
I was going to say Jaws.
Well, it's Mars is one of the, so he does this, Holst has this whole series of compositions for classical music, the planets, and dedicated to each of the, Venus, and Mars is very martial, very, obviously, very, militaristic. And that's the theme that we get for Klingons it's based on. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's very, if you listen to them both, you hear it, and that's
of course the irony of another name for Mars is Vulcan,
right?
But
yes,
it's a little confusing there.
Yeah, so we'll stick with Mars on that.
But talk about music too. The original Courage theme does show up at times.
Yes,
but and I'm not a music expert. I never studied much more than just basic music, but to my ear, it sounded like it was almost different key, like a minor key or something. It wasn't exactly the same key as it is in the opening credits for the original series. Like they would use it in different, almost, more perilous situations. As the ship, as the Enterprise is going into the enemy ship, that's when they would use it.
Right. Right. That's true. Yeah. Like the situations that feel classically Star Trek. I think that's sort of the idea is this is a Star Trek moment.
Exactly.
That idea.
Which is what cinematic music is there to tell you. What kind of moment we're having.
Now, when you all watched it, again for this recording, was there a moment in the beginning where it was just black screen and music?
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
there is. There's this.
Like
I
3
have
minutes.
Exactly. I have it in my notes that there's this bizarre, long, dark opening, and we don't get our first image for 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
Right. Apparently, this was a practice commonly used for "quote unquote" I'll do the air quotes, epic movies. And so this is Ailea's theme, which is sort of the love theme for the movie, and so it's kind of funny that it's. I guess they also used it. This was one of the last Hollywood movies to do this, where they have this moment in the theater where you have this music playing before anything starts, and apparently Disney's The Black Hole also did this. These are the last two movies that did this.
This was before they discovered you could show 30 minutes of commercials before the start of the movie.
Right, exactly. With no fast forward. That's the problem. So let's talk about the other big thing. The
pajamas they're all wearing?
Well, actually, that's the third big thing. The second big thing, the head ridge in the room, is the Klingon redesign. So this was a big deal. Because one of the first things we see in this is Klingons. You see the Klingon battlecruiser. It's clearly Klingon battlecruiser, and then we see these aliens with these weird bumpy heads, and I remember at the time going, "Who are these guys?" Like, that's a Klingon ship.
Exactly.
What are they doing in Klingon ships? And they're speaking,
and they're not speaking English.
They're not speaking English. They're speaking another language, and this was a big deal. I mean, fans kind of freaked out a little bit about this. There was some serious division among fans over, the redesign of the Klingons.
Right. And there were explanations like maybe these are the northern Klingons and the ones we'd seen previously are the southern Klingons. Or maybe they're from a different planet in the Klingon Empire. Maybe there's been a coup and these are the new guys in power. All kinds of explanations got offered. But ultimately, the fans accepted this. I think because it fundamentally was an upgrade. And, to quote the MST3K mantra, it's just a show. I should really just relax. We have on the original show, they had a tiny budget. Now they've got a bigger budget. They're trying to do something better for us. And it worked, unlike with Star Trek Discovery.
Right. And, that's actually that kind of leads to one thing I want to talk about. It's interesting to look at the take on continuity looking back at the movie.
Right.
What it would have been like then. It was still established in continuity. But now with the whole controversy with Discovery and everything, the upset of how the ships look and the technology within the ships and the look of the Klingons and everything. And then to look back at this movie where they kind of did the same thing.
Yes.
The looks of the ships changed. The technology inside the ships changed. The look of the Klingons changed. The uniforms became very ugly.
Welcome to the 70s.
The cast hated the pajamas and they required help getting into them and stuff because they were sewn into them. Right. So if you needed to go to the bathroom, you had to be unsewn. And they demanded if we go forward, we have new uniforms, which they then did. Also, the uniforms have these weird little belly pouch devices. And they never explain their function on screen. In the novel, which is credited to Gene Roddenberry, although I'm sure he had a ghostwriter, their function is explained as their recording devices monitoring your life signs and also what's going on around you, apparently.
So kind of like the next generation comm badge without the actual communication aspect.
Yeah.
Right.
And that on your stomach.
Yeah, the comm badge became a Fitbit, essentially.
Exactly.
Which, they talk into their wrist a lot in this in this movie.
By the way, you mentioned the Klingon language, and this is its first appearance. Up to now, it's all been handled by Universal Translator. They went to a linguist named Mark Akin to design the Klingon language. And he did something very interesting. This is a treat for me because I'm a linguist as an amateur linguist. I study, and linguistics doesn't just mean learning languages. It means studying the phenomenon of language. And one of the things that has been noted is that human languages tend to have certain overall grammatical structures. English is what's called a subject-verb object language, or SVO language. That means in a typical English sentence, the subject comes first, then the verb, then the object, if there is an object. So like Bob hit Bill. Bob's the subject, hits the verb, Bill is the object of the hitting. Other languages have other structures. And there's like 24 possible combinations, but overwhelmingly, only a few of them get used. It's like our brains are wired to use certain structures. And so, and there's like a couple of the structures that are virtually ignored in human language. There's only a few debatable languages that maybe use them. And so what Mark Akin did was say, let's be alien. Let's make Klingon have a non-human grammatical structure that's one of the ones we don't use.
Right. And he really kind of creates a genre in a sense. I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien, who famously, he was a philologist. He loved language. And he created his Elvish and Dwarvish and various other languages used in his works. But Mark Akin was sort of pioneered this for the visual creative art forms of movies and TV. And now this is a somewhat, I don't know, common is the word, but you see this all over the place. Game of Thrones has several of these constructed languages, which are in Avatar, the movie, has the Na'vi language, that have enough substance to them that they can become actual conversational languages.
Well, in Klingon, you can go to Duolingo online and study Klingon. You can learn the Klingon language,
as well as one of the Westworld languages, which I forget, starts with V. You can
also, Land of the Lost has the Pakuni language, which is actually a lot easier than Klingon.
So the language is very interesting, and there's something even online called the Klingon Language Institute you can find. So let's get into the story itself. So we've got this big giant space cloud that's traveling through space. The Klingons, being Klingons, decide that it's a threat and they attack it and get vaporized. Then the cloud approaches a Starfleet communications hub that gets vaporized, which some things happen in between, but just, kind of, and it's headed on a direct course for Earth, because in the movies, there's always a threat headed directly for Earth. That's just how it is.
And it's only a week away or 5 days away or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Also, I like that they have a communications array in this, because often, we don't get, the technology just seems to work magically, and we don't get a sense of what underlies it. But here we get to see some infrastructure, and that's nice.
Yes. And also, once again, the Enterprise is the only ship in range of Earth. Yes. It's a trope that appears often in the movies. It's a dumb trope, because Starfleet is just dumb. It's dumb.
Well,
so to pull off a YouTube video I watched recently, this is the headquarters of the Federation. This is the headquarters of Starfleet. It's supposedly the most important planet in the entire Federation. And there's one ship that's still in space dock that can defend it.
Yeah,
right.
That's ridiculous. Now, it's not ridiculous when they're on the outer fringes of Federation space and they're the only ship in range. That's like if you're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you may be the only aircraft carrier in range, of some trouble spot. But Earth, I mean, come on, that's like saying we don't have anybody else docked around the continental United States we could send.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. We have no ships in Newport, Virginia to defend us. Yeah. So, and at the start of this, after the end of the 5-year mission, some of the crew scattered, moved on to other assignments. Some stayed with the Enterprise, which went in for refit.
Yeah, and they also really got in touch with their inner 1960s selves, because Spock comes back with long hair and McCoy comes back with a long beard. So they've really gotten in touch with their inner hippies.
McCoy retired, And Spock went back to Vulcan to go through something called the Kolinar, which we've never heard of before, but is apparently a Vulcan ritual in which they purge all emotions. So as we've established, Vulcans have emotion, but they keep it suppressed and they don't express it, preferring to use logic instead of emotional responses. But there are some Vulcans who want to purge all emotion, become emotionless. And so Spock is going through this, and he's about to graduate. He's actually at his, like an ordination ceremony. And just as he's going to get this new necklace that signifies his status, he stops because he senses V'ger calling out to him.
He stops the ceremony. He puts his hand up and keeps the Vulcan matriarch from giving it to him.
Yes. And for all that this Vulcan matriarch has purged emotions, she looks awfully condescending when she tells Spock that V'ger is calling his human blood. I'm not sure she's actually purged all emotion.
Yeah, exactly.
Although maybe condescension, Vulcans don't recognize condescension as an emotion.
Well, it is an action, but it's based on emotion. But I think in Deep Space Nine, do they even at one point refer to Vulcan hypocrisy regarding their emotions? Because
they might have.
Yeah.
I don't recall, but it seems like
I'm not
familiar.
sure
That sounds
either. It's
familiar.
either that or Vulcan arrogance.
Yeah. And meanwhile, so Kirk, for his part, decided to take a promotion and become an admiral. Youngest admiral in Starfleet again. He's the chief of operations, which is not the guy in charge of Starfleet, but apparently it's some general staff roles, shall we say. And yet, when the opportunity, he apparently has some buyer's remorse, and when the opportunity comes up to face down an emergency, he decides, I'm going to take back Enterprise and do this. So there's an interesting. We've created some dramatic tension here,
right? And that creates then conflict because Enterprise has a captain who is Decker,
Captain,
son
Decker.
of Commodore Decker.
Yeah, Commodore Matt Decker, which is not established in the movie itself,
but is elsewhere.
But is elsewhere in the novelization and other places. Matt Decker was the captain who rode the shuttle into the giant space cornucopia that was eating planets.
Yeah, in the Doomsday Machine.
Yes, the Doomsday Machine. So Kirk beams up to the Enterprise. Scotty takes him on a long...
we get the 5-minute plus, depending on the version you're watching, visual tour of the outside of the Enterprise in dry dock first.
Oh, yes.
And actually, it's been pointed out, even though in the original version of the movie, it's just way too long. We do actually need a lengthy visual tour of the Enterprise in the movie because this was the first time we'd seen it in new footage in over 10 years. They've upgraded it. We need time to say hello to the beloved ship, to bond with it emotionally, given that it's different. And also it sets us up. Seeing the majestic, huge size of this thing sets us up for the even more majestic, huger sizes of things that we're going to be seeing later in the movie to give us a proper sense of scale. Because once they get into the cloud and the alien spaceship that is V'ger, we see the Enterprise, and at that point, it's tiny. And this is the necessary prequel to make that meaningful.
And it's also, worth pointing out that in the 10 plus years and with the movie budget that they have, that the ability to do these outside EVA special effects and shots is just, it's light years, pun intended again, or generations ahead of where they were. I mean, they part of it is they're doing it because they can, because wow,
for
this
the
looks
first
cool.
time.
Right.
We have the money to do this. Let's do it.
Yes, and as a fan of the technology as much as of the stories, as a kid, I loved seeing the Enterprise. I mean, it might have still been a little long, this loving tour, but still.
And by the way, we should be fair to the director, Robert Wise, who is a very competent director. I mean, he's a really skilled artist in film. But this film was plagued by so many problems. It really went off the rails. And it came together so late in the game, including because of all the visual effects they were using, that he literally took a fresh print, what's called a wet print, from the West Coast and flew it, under his arm on the plane to the premiere in Washington, and had no time for editing. So essentially, we're watching what's basically a rough cut of the film. When it was first released in theaters, he had no time for fine-tuning it, and he didn't get that for years and years and years until they finally did a DVD special edition, and he got to go back in and tighten and polish and things like that.
And that's what I watched. I ended up watching the director's cut that came out in 2000, and it really is a much tighter film.
I think I'm going to go back and watch that again because I wanted to see the long version, but I do want to come back and look at that director's cut and compare. So one of the things
there are scenes that I remember from watching years ago that I didn't see when I rewatched this last night.
Yeah,
and it's because of that, because they cut a lot out. Not a lot, but they cut a bit out.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that comes up is the actors themselves thinking about the film. As Leonard Nimoy, for instance, said that in 1983, he said about it that it's a finely crafted film, but from an actor's point of view, it was frustrating because we didn't feel we were getting to play the characters that we enjoyed playing in the way that we knew how to play them, and that's part of it because Spock is now this different. He's gone through this change. He's not the Spock of the show, of the TV show. Kirk is different. McCoy is different, and I think that's was a little bit wrenching for the fans as well.
Yeah, the actors are very disconnected from each other. We don't have the interpersonal character dynamic that we normally do. All the attention is on V'ger, the threat in this, which doesn't even get a name for most of the movie.
Right.
But it's all the attention is riveted on that. The characters don't have time to breathe and interact with each other. And that was one of the big changes in the next movie, Wrath of Khan, where we have much more of the established character dynamic.
And to be fair, to keep it within the story, you'd almost expect that they had separated for a number of years. One source I said it was only 3 years.
Yeah, it was 2 or 3 years.
And so they had to almost kind of relearn each other again because they'd been away for a few years. They had gone their separate directions. So you could kind of understand that. But that being said, it did kind of weaken the movie a little bit.
Well, another thing that Nimoy said much later in 2012, so very recently, in fact, is that they were kind of going for, like Robert Wise, Gene Roddenberry, he thinks that they were trying to go for a 2001 A Space Odyssey kind of thing, like Kubrick had done.
Oh, yes.
So a cold, cool, we're out here in space and it's kind of quiet and things move very slowly sort of feel.
You definitely see that during the rocket pack scene. That very much was 2001 influenced.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and all that traveling through V'ger is, effectively a ripoff of the end of 2001, where it's this huge outer space psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
I have to make a confession. I fell asleep at one point while watching that. I just it was familiar to me, and so not new, and therefore I kind of fell asleep. Anyway, so that's an interesting aspect of the way this movie turned out. So back to the movie itself. So like the crew, we have the crew back. We have Uhura, we have Sulu, we have Chekhov, we have everybody there. We have Decker has been added. We even have Janice Rand as the transporter chief, which is an interesting promotion for her. Mm-hmm. We also have a great scene where they're all gathered in the recreation deck with Kirk to address them all, the entire crew. And we have a bunch of aliens, as well as a couple of Native Americans in traditional garb.
Yeah, which was neat.
Yeah, that was a very interesting choice. And somebody's kid with acne who got to be an extra in this scene. I noticed that. There's some kid who had some pretty bad acne in the crowd scene.
No, he's just an alien. They could cure acne by the 23rd century.
Oh, right, of course.
Sure.
He must have been just the acne aliens. So we have this transporter accident, which was, again, as a kid when I saw this, had a huge impact on me. Oh,
that was freaky.
It was scary.
It was scary as a kid.
We've never seen that before.
Right. That this Commander Sonak, the Vulcan science officer that Kirk had just talked to, now we get clearly that he has been turned inside out by the transporter somehow.
And this character, although when they were prepping Star Trek Phase 2, the character was called Zahn, and because they didn't think they could get Leonard Nimoy back, because he kind of turned his back on everything Star Trek after a while, and they didn't think they could get him back for Phase 2, the TV show, so they created a younger Vulcan named Zahn, who would kind of bond with Kirk and be taken under Kirk's wing and actually get along really well with McCoy. And that carried over to the film because they didn't think they could get Nimoy for the film. And so they changed it to Sonak here. They'd actually cast a guy as Zahn, but they cast a new guy as Sonak. And then it turned out Nimoy was willing to do the film. So they wrote him in, and they thus had to write Sonak out.
Can you imagine that scene, that episode they called the actor who played Sonak into the office? Well, we've got some bad news.
Got some good news and bad news. Good news, you're still in. Bad news, not as long as you thought.
The really bad news, we're turning you inside out.
And the amazing thing is Dr. McCoy then uses the transporter in like the next scene after it's just turned somebody inside out. Him of all people.
Right. The one guy who hates the transporter. I love that. So another a new crew member is Lieutenant Ilea, who is of the heretofore unknown Deltan race, the Deltans.
Right.
And they mentioned
I thought she was from Beta Z. Maybe not.
Or Delta's.
No, she is Delta. Yeah, but I'm just noting because
Alpha Gamma.
Yeah, she and I'm playing on the Commander Troy thing because Riker and Troy's relationship is directly lifted from Decker and Ilea's. In fact, Riker even sounds like Decker.
Yes, it's very clearly a gloss on that.
Except for she's got a oath of celibacy.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
And they don't mention anything else about it. It's just
this explanation is in the novelization. So, and Roddenberry's name is on it, so therefore it must be canon, right? Is that the Deltans emit pheromones that are so powerful that it causes every human male around them to kind of lose it.
Even George Takei has the hots for
her. which is quite a feat of pheromones. So yeah, again, it's another one of those Roddenberry things, I think. That's here. Thankfully, they didn't spend too much time on it. The actress, Persis Khambatta, not a famous actress, who apparently shaved her head for this role. She just not wearing a makeup cap or whatever they call it.
Bald cap.
A bald cap. She is bald. She's got the head shaved.
Yeah, and that was a controversial decision. A lot of people thought bald lady is not the way to go if you want her to be super sexy. Right. But it does give her an exotic feel.
Right.
As an on-screen presence. And I don't think it was a bad decision, but a lot of people did.
Right. I was going to say I don't think she was much of an actress. I think she was more of a model at that point.
This was her first film role, I believe.
Yes, yeah. And I like the idea that you kind of pair this, super sexy alien thing with something that is sort of definitively the opposite of what we think of as sexy woman, which is bald. I mean, we haven't had Sinead O'Connor yet at this point, so it's sort of a new thing.
Kind of proves the point. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna. That's not the best example.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that we hadn't disproved that by
hadn't
Sinead
been
O'Connor,
a thing. It hadn't been a thing yet. Yeah.
Yes, but the idea of just sort of it plays with your perceptions, and that, which I think Star Trek has always done well, and I liked them doing that. So we get Dr. McCoy gets shanghaied by Kirk back to the is that a
little
thing?
Known, little used reserve activation clause.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's this great moment where Kirk sort of he says, "Look, he cuts through the baloney and says, "Look, I need you, McCoy." Because remember, he doesn't have Spock here. He doesn't think he's going to get Spock.
And Dr. Chapel isn't cutting it.
No, she is not. And he says, "There's a thing out there." And McCoy has this great line: "Why is everything we don't understand always a thing?"
thing. Yep.
And that's
because it's a useful placeholder word for things we don't understand.
But it's such a McCoy phrase, like, hey, let's, we stop depersonalizing everything.
Because ontologically, it is a thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, then he, 2 minutes later, he's like, I've got to get down to the sick bay. I know engineers. They love to change things.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then we've got some scenes that sort of establish the conflict between Decker and Kirk, because Kirk has supplanted Decker, made him first officer, demoted him even.
Temporary field demotion, yeah. Temporary reduction in rank.
Right, where Decker thinks is probably he's not getting that center chair back from Kirk. He just knows Kirk, and he's right, because Kirk is not going to give that back. We know it. Maybe Kirk doesn't know it, but the audience knows it. Mm-hmm. Then they have this moment where Kirk's lack of familiarity with the Enterprise as she currently is puts them in danger, and only Decker can save them.
Mm-hmm. Belay that phaser order.
Yeah.
Yes, where everybody shakes in slow motion, and it's just really uncomfortable to watch.
That's the one scene, if I was the director, would have stayed on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. The whole wormhole sequence doesn't really add.
But like you said, the only thing it points out is the fact that this is, although it's a refit, it really is a different ship.
It's a new ship, yeah. I think if they replaced this scene with something that said the same thing, that would have been fine. But yeah, it was too long, too overly, whatever. The slow motion thing didn't work. But I like the idea.
They could have done it much more effectively when Kirk and Decker get into the turbo lift. Kirk could have just pressed the wrong button in the turbo lift, almost blown up the ship, and Decker pressed the right button instead.
Although there is a somewhat similar moment where Kirk gets lost and has to ask a yeoman where to go, and turns around and Decker's looking at him like, yeah, you don't know this ship.
Exactly.
Very interesting. So then we get the long.
By the way, 35-minute mark is when the ship finally leaves dry dock.
Right.
We're a quarter of the way through the movie before we get out of dry dock.
Right. And then we have the wormhole. We get Spock back. Spock is not the same guy we remember, which is disconcerting. They encounter the cloud, and then we get a 10-minute. I timed it. 10-minute ride through the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Interspersed with a couple moments of talking, but still, it's a very long sequence. Maybe not as long as I thought it was. I thought it was even longer than that, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
It was 10 minutes. We get the sense that the scale of V'ger is massive.
Right. And it's really weird and psychedelic. And we are people watching people on screen, watching things on screen.
Right.
Yeah.
For a huge chunk of this movie.
Right. They get a probe comes on board to scan them. You notice in this.
It's an effective probe. It's like lightning. It's kind of like a column of lightning, and it eats Lieutenant Ilia.
Yes, it absorbs her, essentially digitizes her, which is sort of a Tron effect. She's dead. So let's talk about.
It looked like a painful death too. She's like,
Let's talk about that for a second. Is Ilia dead at this point?
Yes.
And what comes back is something else.
Well, it is a probe. It says it's a probe.
Yep.
Bones keeps saying that this is a mechanism. This is not a person. This is a mechanism.
So even when at the end where she exhibits Ilia's
that's her memories that were reproduced in the mechanism. And it kind of explains it, that reproduced by the mechanism. So it really isn't her, but it's her memories and her feelings from those memories coming to the surface.
She's being influenced by Ilia's memory patterns, which are copied into her, even though she is a device.
So I wanted to get at it from an ontological or philosophical standpoint. Mm-hmm. What happens with Decker at the end, just kind of jumping ahead,
super creepy
because he's merging with a machine. It's not Ilia.
Yeah,
right. He is essentially giving up his life. He's dying in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Not merging with her, not spending eternity with her.
Well, I think there's some hope of his survival, kinda, because at that point in the movie, Spock is talking about by this merger, they're going to maybe be able to explore alternative dimensions that may exist but cannot be scientifically proved to exist.
Right.
So there's like, by this merger of man and machine, there's some hope of survival for Decker in some form.
Right.
But there's no guarantee he's not just going to be digitized the way Ilea was. And furthermore, I mean, he's talking to Kirk about as much as you want the Enterprise, I want this. And it's like, God, that is so creepy, dude. This is the this is the manifestation of what killed your girlfriend and took her form. This is an electronic pod person, and you want that more than anything? It killed your girlfriend.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at, is like this idea that Decker has a happy ending. Decker has a horrific ending in this movie. Yeah. He's not getting what he thinks he's getting.
Yeah, they think, that through Decker merging with V'ger / Ilea, that you'll have the raw logic of a machine combined with the creativity of a human.
Right. What you've probably said
to create a new baby,
What you've done is created this super powerful machine that's probably gone insane with grief, traveling through the dimensions. I want to see that come back in a future a Star Trek movie, The Return of V'ger.
That'd be funny.
There's
this
a moment.
Time it's personal.
Yes, exactly. There's a moment where Spock is trying to tell them, with when they've been trapped inside of V'ger. Decker's like, no, we should fight our way out. And Spock's like, any show of resistance would be futile. And Decker's like, we don't know that. Why are you opposed to trying? And I'm like, because they would interpret it as a hostile act and would vaporize us like everybody else. Like,
they didn't even want to raise shields for the risk of setting off a threat. What makes you think that, arming a photon torpedo won't do worse?
Right. It's just that Decker was not a good first officer. And actually, I think it proves why Kirk was the better man for the job, after all. We find out that V'ger is the Voyager 6 probe, which doesn't really exist. In the real world, there were only 2 Voyager probes.
Right.
But to be fair, this movie did come out when those probes were being produced and launched. So the prospect of a Voyager 6 was a real thing.
In fact, it was in the news. It was in the public consciousness, Voyager. And so people would have recognized it from seeing it on screen.
By the way, just go ahead.
I was going to say there was an original series episode about, I forget what it was called, but about the Changeling. The Changeling. Okay, with a probe called Nomad, which sort of had the same thing happen to it. It was an Earth probe that went out, got changed, got super intelligent, came back, and it tried to take over the Enterprise. And
it thought Kirk was its creator, whereas V'ger is now searching for a nameless, the creator, but that is mankind.
Right.
So it's interesting. I was going to point this out, too, that essentially Star Trek The Motion Picture is a big screen remake of The Changeling.
Right.
And I don't have a problem with doing big screen remakes. It's kind of like what they did to the Klingons. It's like, okay, it's an upgrade.
Yes.
But The Changeling is actually a better episode than this movie is. So that's a problem. Also, notice the second movie, Wrath of Khan, is a sequel to Space Seed.
Yep.
So we have the first 2 Star Trek movies very directly playing on episodes of the original series.
Right.
By the way, one illustration of why The Changeling is better than this, The Changeling is like, whatever it is at the time, 45, 50 minutes long.
Yes.
Well, there's a moment where they've finally gotten to the core part of V'ger, where the Voyager probe itself is, and it's acting up. And Spock has this line about V'ger is a child. He's got this major revelation.
Yes.
And McCoy says, your child is having a tantrum, Mr. Spock. And so this is like the comic relief line at what should be virtually at the beginning of the dramatic climax. We have 20 minutes left to go in this movie at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's almost half the running time of The Changeling.
Yes, exactly. We find out that V'ger ended up getting damaged, going through some sort of wormhole, ending up at a planet of living machines, which is either Cybertron or the Borg home planet. I haven't decided which yet. That's my headcanon.
Well, and I think it was Roddenberry who may have suggested that it may have been the Borg home planet, which would actually not make any sense, because if it had been the Borg home planet, they wouldn't have patched it up and sent it on its way. They would have sent a Borg cube to find out where this thing was from.
They would have absorbed its distinctiveness and made it their own, and then sought out its origin, which is what it was established. So, and as you said, Spock realizes that for all its pure logic, V'ger is barren, and that's a revelation for Spock, because he had been seeking out pure logic for himself, and he's realizing that is a path that leads to a barrenness of life. So, very interesting self-realization there. And in fact, after this, in the future movies, Spock is much more relaxed. He's much more willing to show some emotion. He's still a reserved person, but there's more emotion.
So Leonard Nimoy was much more relaxed too. He initially thought, I'll come back and do this film, but I want to be killed off.
Yes.
And he had so much fun doing the film that he said, as off the rails as it went, he still had so much fun. He said, I might be willing to do more of these. And that led to his involvement in the future films.
It also doesn't hurt when you back up a truck full of cash to your house.
That doesn't hurt either.
That's true, too. Yeah, exactly.
And 2 directorial credits.
Yes, that is actually what I think it was a huge element in him sticking around. Because he started directing stuff at around this time, I think. As you said, he makes the point, V'ger is a child, learning, evolving, searching, and needing a parent. And so that's why we get
so we've got an Electra complex going on here too at the ending,
right? So I guess what we're saying, that Decker and whatever remains of Ilea are the parents to.
I took it. I would, since Ilea at this point is just the human face of V'ger. It's like Decker's the parent and Ilea is Electra.
Well, in one sense, it's Ilea's memories and personality, I guess, is what I don't know. It's weird enough as it is. One thing I did like was that whole sequence of the Enterprise sort of bumping up against that the structure of hexagonal.
Looks like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland.
Exactly. Finn McCool is standing in the middle, waiting for them. And but if you don't know who Finn McCool is, look him up. It's a lot of fun. Irish have the best myths, and so they walk along. It would have taken forever to walk along these hexagonal structures to the middle. You've got 10 minutes before they blast Earth, but we're walking like what's got to be a couple miles in high heels. By the way, that's as Princess Gambada is walking high heels as she's doing this, because apparently they don't want to put a uniform on her. They gave her the tiniest of bathrobes and high heels to walk in around the ship.
And in her probe form, she's got this little glowing red crystal oval in the middle of her clavicle, and that actually was a real problem for her, because the technology was so primitive at the time. They had to light it. They didn't have LED lights or anything at the time. And so that's a hot light bulb she's got on.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And they had it connected by wires to a battery pack on her back, but that thing would burn her.
Oh wow.
Boy.
What people do for their art. Ugh. Yeah. So one of the things it kind of came out for me is why was Decker so intent on joining with V'ger? Like that whole, as much as you want Enterprise, I want this. His relationship with Ilea is never really established. Like that's one of the major structural problems with this movie, among the others.
They do hint at it, but they don't display it. We never get any big time romance between them early on in the movie.
No,
right. Like he goes from, I am the captain of the Enterprise. This is my ship too. Well, I can't have the ship, so I'm going to do this instead. Like it's
exactly.
It's too quick, too much.
He's on the rebound from losing the Enterprise.
Yep.
Captain's always married to his ship. This is just his rebound.
He's going to run off with the alien cyborg
machine. Yeah.
Machine. And so, once they've solved the problem, which the MacGuffin is dealt with. V'ger evolves and goes to another plane of existence, and Kirk, again we get that moment where they're back on the Enterprise bridge, and Kirk says, "I think we gave it the ability to create its own sense of purpose out of our own human weaknesses and the drive that compels us to overcome them." And that's sort of the theme for this, right? Each of the characters have, especially Kirk, let's just say, has done the same thing. He's out of his own human weakness, his desire to sit in that chair, and he's overcome it to really do a service to humanity, or to the Federation, whatever. I think that's the theme we're supposed to take from it.
Yeah.
So and then we end with them going off on their second what fans have established as a second 5-year mission before the Wrath of Khan. So any final notes on this movie?
I just have some little ones, just in terms of like small things that I liked in the movie. In the opening sequence, before Kirk shows up, when we're getting shots of San Francisco in the 23rd century, we have a shot of the Golden Gate Bridge, which is now like a turbo bridge that has got one of those hamster Habitrail tubes over it now. I liked that. When we finally get onto the bridge after the kind of elegiac tour of the outside of the Enterprise, all of a sudden the bridge is chaos, and you got all these people talking over each other, and they're trying to wire stuff up. And because we're told the Enterprise has been in refit for 18 months. And there's a guy doing something to the ceiling. I assume he's installing lights or something. But he's floating on this little circular footpad that's floating above the ground. And I like that.
I want one.
Yeah,
exactly.
I liked how we have security guards in this who are wearing this kind of padded body armor that makes them look like Moops ball players from the Legion of Superheroes.
Yes.
It's nice to see. If you're you might want more than just a red shirt to protect you.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Kirk, and I kind of don't like this as much, but Kirk's captain's chair has these fold-in armrests that are movable.
Yep.
And they later use that a little bit more in other movies. And then Kirk has a really great line at one point talking about V'ger before they know that V'ger is like a single thing. They think there may be a crew or something on V'ger. And at one point, they're talking about where they've put the Enterprise, and Kirk says, now that they've got us just where they want us.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is a reversal of the normal line of we've got them just where we want them.
Right.
And then they have a kind of unfortunate line where they're talking about the closed orifice and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, we know exactly what that kind of looked like. Father Cory, any notes?
One personal note. My first exposure to this movie as a kid wasn't the movie itself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember from Buena Vista Records, which is Disney. It's a Disney recording studio. They had read-along books, where they're little books, book like 24-page book and a cassette, or started out with records, but by the time I got to them, they were cassettes. And I was remembering this as I was watching it. My first exposure of this movie was one of those. I had the Star Trek motion picture read-along book and cassette. I wish I had it today because it's probably worth some money now if it's in halfway decent shape, which I doubt it was by the time me and my brother were done with it.
Did they use some of the soundtrack from the movie on the cassette, or was it like a fresh read?
It was as I recall, it's a fresh read. You can actually, I found it on YouTube, and I was going to go and look at it. I didn't get a chance to. Someone has recorded it where they took a camera and had it on the book and played the cassette, and then you can flip the pages. So you can go and look at that today. If you search for the Star Trek motion picture read along, you can find it. But
awesome.
It's kind of one of those I flash. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that. So I knew the story before I actually saw the movie.
Interesting. I think I had the Pete's Dragon version of that.
I think I might have had that one too, actually.
The Helen Reddy and the Disney movie. One of the things you said, Jimmy, kind of reminding me that this was the first time we saw Earth in Star Trek after the cage, the first pilot. So we saw like a fantasy of the Mojave Desert.
Right.
In that.
Well, 24th century Earth, because we did see like 1960s Earth in Return to Tomorrow.
Right. That's Ash what I meant. Yes, thank you. And so they see Earth. This is also where it is established that Starfleet headquarters is in San Francisco.
Right.
We hadn't had that established before. So, and that becomes canon going forward, and Starfleet Academy is there as well, and that sort of thing. In later movies, we'll establish that the Federation's seat of government is in Paris. Interesting.
By the way, I've been to the future site of Starfleet headquarters. There was a Morris dancing convention a couple of years ago up in San Francisco, and so I made sure I went to the exact site of Starfleet headquarters on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge.
At the Presidio?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I've been there too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun. Although when I went there, they've actually. It's been developed a lot since I've been there. In fact, I think, if I recall correctly, Lucasfilm has a annex of their studio in the Presidio, which is interesting. So anyway, so that's what we have to say about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. What is your overall assessment? We just kind of get that. How do you feel about this? So, there's famously Star Trek fans say the odd number of movies are the bad ones, and the even number of movies are the good ones. How do you feel about this movie overall, Jimmy?
I remember when it came out, I saw it in the theaters, and I'd been a Star Trek fan from the syndication days. And so I was really looking forward to it. My memory is at the time I liked it, but wow, did it not age well. And I'm glad it exists. I'm glad it got Star Trek, back in active production, because it gave us better things like The Wrath of Khan and The Search for Whales and The Undiscovered Country. So I'm glad it exists, and I'm really glad that Robert Wise had a chance to do what he could all those years later to tone it up.
Right.
But I think the rule still holds. The odd numbered movies are inferior. The even numbered movies are superior.
Right.
Father Cory, what's your final assessment?
I think I would agree with Jimmy about that, about not saying bad, but inferior. Again, just recently watching the director's cut version did improve the movie. Again, it didn't save the movie. The movie is still an inferior movie compared to Wrath of Khan and the ones following, but it did weather better because of that director's cut. I will say that.
Yeah, although we can all agree that the Search for Spock is the worst. I mean, Final Frontier is the worst.
Final Frontier is the worst.
Cybok, yes. I would say I'm in general agreement. I say there are lots of parts of this movie that I like. There's plenty, as we've discussed, that could have been improved, tightened up. It does not. There are large parts of it that do not age well. But that it's sort of a product of its time. But it's still Star Trek, and it's still a fun romp with the characters that I love, and that's in those moments where it's not boring me to sleep. I'm still glad it's there, and I'm glad I watched it again. So that's it. That's it from us. So what did you think of Star Trek: The Motion Picture? What do you think of what we had to say about it? We want to hear from you. We want to start putting some feedback from our audience into our future episodes of Star Trek, The Secrets of Star Trek. So either go to sqpn.com/trek or to the SQPN Facebook page, find the link to today's show and leave a comment there. Or you can, if you don't have Facebook, you can send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. You can leave us a Twitter response at SQPN on Twitter. And you can find links to all of our personal social media and our websites on our show notes on sqpn.com. If you can, please go to iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher. Leave us a review there to help other fans find us and recommend us to your friends, especially your friends who are Star Trek fans. We really appreciate it. That's how our show reaches new people. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Encounter at Farpoint.
Exactly.
The pilot episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and you have a nice preview there of how we feel about it,
which will actually make for fun listening because we will not be kind.
Well, let's be honest, folks. The best shows are the ones where we don't really like the thing that we're reviewing because we have the funniest responses. So until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Live long and prosper, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
Once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek. And remember, capture God, future's liable to be in for one heck of a disappointment. This is Dom Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.